Good evening and welcome to Tata Steel Kolkata Literary Meets Independence Weekend Special Freedom Song. Today is day two, and this is brought to you in association with British Council, with whom we have a long-standing relationship as collaborators. I will now invite Debanjan Chakraborty, Director, British Council East and Northeast India, to address those present and also introduce our last session for the day. Debanjan?
Thank you, Shukonna. I just wanted to check if I'm audible to everyone.
Yes.
Yeah. Good evening and Jai Hind, everyone. I'm Debanjan Chakraborty, as Sukanya said, and I wish each of you a very happy Independence Day. I'm delighted that Tata Steel Kolkata Literary Meet, our favorite Kalam for short, is organizing Freedom Song, celebrating the 74th year of our independence and the beginning of the landmark 75th year of independence celebrations. I'm thankful to Malavika Banerjee and the team for thinking of us, and here at British Council, we are delighted to celebrate the partnership we have with Tata Steel Kalam through this association as well. It extends our friendship and our collaboration. All of us have been passing through some very difficult times for the last 1.5 years, with the COVID pandemic challenging our lives and loves, but also I think our human values. I very much hope that arts, crafts, and culture, including literature and the performing arts, will significantly contribute to the healing of the world as we begin to emerge from this crisis. While the pandemic has put a stop to live festivals and authors traveling back and forth between our two countries, I think we have collectively pushed the envelope on using digital technologies in the meanwhile in recreating festivals in a virtual online world. And the Freedom Song series of online events is a great example of us adapting to the restrictions imposed by the pandemic on us. In recent times, we have partnered with both established literature festivals and emerging ones all across India. Through these partnerships, we have facilitated the free exchange of views and celebrated the value that both India and UK place on freedom of ideas as functioning democracies. In parallel with partnering festivals such as we have also supported the development of skills in festivals management sector through a program called Festivals Academy. British Council and British High Commission in India are planning to celebrate the 75th independence anniversary with the Government of India and several partners in both our countries. This 2-year season, titled India UK Together or Saath Saath in Hindi, will run from later this year to the end of 2023, which will dovetail into British Council India's 75 years in India. Literature and publishing are a thriving and diverse part of the United Kingdom's cultural sector, and it has a global reputation for excellence. Earlier today, we had Ruskin Bond in conversation with Malavika, and now we are heading into a series called The Patient Assassin. This is with Anita Anand. Anita is a popular face on British television, and she has made the entangled and complex history between the UK and India come alive through her remarkable books. Her book, Sophia the Suffragette Princess, is a landmark book and talks about Sophia Dalip Singh, but in context also of her role in the Indian freedom movement, and very remarkably her role in highlighting the contribution of Indian soldiers in the First World War. Her book on Kohinoor with William Dalrymple is something that I've really enjoyed. So thank you, Anita, for being with us. And today, of course, we'll be talking about The Patient Assassin, the story of Udham Singh and the Amritsar massacre. Anita will be in conversation this evening with Himanjali Sankar, herself an author, both novelist and non-fiction, and an editor of note, currently working with Simon & Schuster. Over to you, Himanjali. Thank you.
Thank you, Debanjan. And so, yes, thank you for the kind introduction. And this book was first published as The Patient Assassin internationally and in India 2 years back. And the paperback edition was published in India in April this year, in the anniversary month of Jallianwala Bagh, and it's called Udham Singh. If you hold it up, Udham Singh, The Revenge of Jallianwala Bagh. So it's a very well researched, meticulously detailed book. The writing is quick, fast paced, gripping. So I'm going to jump in with my first question, Anita. This book has been called a non-fiction thriller, and while I'm not even sure if that's a genre that formally exists, it is apt for this book. And I was wondering about your writing process, how you plan your chapters, characters, how do you do your research, and basically how does a book like this come together for you?
Thank you very much, Himanjali. And it's a great privilege to be speaking to you today on this of all days. I suppose I should say right from the start that I go about my writing much as I go about my journalism, which is I have a notion that there is a truth somewhere in a mess of little facts, snippets, and truths. And so I build up every book that I've ever worked on a little like a mosaic, and I'm not sure what it's going to look like even at the end of the day. So I suppose what I do is I immerse myself first of all in things that are jumbled and make no sense. And because I've worked in the visual media most of my life, pictures are normally my routine and sometimes a talisman for me to get in under the skin of a story. With the first book that Dibanjan very kindly referred to, about Princess Sophia Dalip Singh, it was actually a photograph which started me off on the process. It was a photograph of a woman outside Hampton Court Palace. If any of you are familiar with Great Britain, it's a place in the west of London, very grand. Henry VIII lived there. And there was a picture of a woman holding a newspaper saying votes for women. And there was nothing remarked underneath it. It was just a picture. It says suffragettes selling newspaper outside Hampton Court. And I'm ethnically Punjabi. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I was born and brought up in Great Britain, but my parents were from India. And there is something about being Punjabi where I suppose you guys have heard of gaydar. We have a thing called banjar, which is you can recognize one of your own even from Google Earth. So there was something about this sepia tinted picture that just didn't make sense to me. And that's what started it. I thought she looks Punjabi. She looks, in fact, like one of my aunties. And so it started off like this itch. I couldn't stop scratching, and this story fell out over a period of years. This story, though, about Udham Singh is very different because it felt familiar to me. It felt familiar because, and I'm sure Himanjali will get into this a little bit later, but my grandfather was there in Jallianwala Bagh on the day of the massacre. And it was a complete quirk of fate that he wasn't there when the shooting started and he wasn't killed because two of his friends who were there at the time were dead. So it's been entwined in my DNA, but that doesn't make it true. And, being a journalist, I've learned to doubt everything and question everything. So although I grew up with this name, Udham Singh, Reginald Dyer, Michael O'Dwyer, they're part of my birthright because of that familial connection. I never trusted it enough until I started working on this book, until I felt brave enough to write this story, which I was always sort of pulled towards because of the family history. So if you don't mind, if I show you what my room looked like, I'm going to show you just some of the pictures for which I surrounded, and my office that you can see behind me, you can't see, there's a very large wall here, which is covered in photographs. And I can't show you at the moment because I'm working on a new book and it would give it away. And you'll think you're talking to a lunatic. But covered in pictures and bits of string and bits of wool connecting things up, a little bit like it does look like it should be a padded cell, to be honest. But I'll show you some of the pictures that I started off with. So if you don't mind showing the first picture. So the first picture, if Pratiti, then the next one, if you don't mind. It's a lovely plug of the book. So this is the very fetching picture of Udham Singh, which I first found when researching images. And as I say, images are the thing that compels me into a story. And he looked unlike any of the images that I'd kind of grown up with. The man with the gun, the man with the turban and the gun, the man with the turban and the gun standing amidst the bodies. And this was a very different face. And I just needed to look at it for a while. The next picture also. if you could move to the next. This man, Reginald Dyer, again, it's a name that we're familiar with, but so much of the imagery has been cast in bronze because of the movie by Attenborough. So, in my head for ages, Reginald Dyer was Edward Fox and looked like Edward Fox and sounded like Edward Fox. And the thing I found with this story is I had to untether myself from the things I thought I knew. So I had a big picture of this and an uncomfortable picture of this man in my office. And then the third picture, because this is, although a story which carries Udham Singh's name and he's the beating heart of this book, it is really the entwined story of three men who lived at a time when the unthinkable happened and all had involvement. This is Sir Michael O'Dwyer. And so much in India, these two names, Dyer and O'Dwyer, have been melded into this composite Rakshas, this kind of demon that melds these two men into one. And so I had to have them very separate and actually, Himanjali, on different walls, so that I had to untangle my own prejudice of how, if you do a Google search, even now you'll find the name Michael O'Dwyer comes up, or Reginald O'Dwyer, or Michael Dyer. People mush them together into one person. And then I'll just very quickly show you the other pictures that I had around me. If you, next picture, please. I managed to get hold of a photo album that belonged to somebody who worked not far from where Michael O'Dwyer was the Lieutenant Governor of Punjab. And this was like the Raj at play. So this was the Raj not pointing guns at each other. Next picture, please. And it's filled with these very strange but almost pastoral images of what they thought India was and what India was to them. Because, I am not of them. And so I had to understand what that mindset was. There were lots of those images. I surrounded myself. Next, please. And then the time that this led into, the time of war, when boys from all over India who possibly had never left their villages before signed up to go and fight in a foreign war in freezing cold trenches in a country they didn't speak the language of, fighting a cause they didn't perhaps understand. Next, please. And so, if you see these pictures, they're all fragments of the story that I felt I needed to tell. This was something that for me represented the images of those boys when they came back. They'd been promised so much by Britain that if you come on, you fight for us, we will reward you. And people like Gandhi thought maybe they'll even reward us with our freedom. And yet what they came back to was this, corralled into camps, treated no better than animals, lathi charges. Next image, please. And so I deliberately, penned up like this, like animals. So I deliberately surrounded myself with pictures that were uncomfortable and then that represented part of this story. And Himanjali, if I come back to you, we'll come back to the pictures a bit later now. So I sort of started with those images that provoked me and actually stopped me from doing anything else and stopped my mind from wandering at any other time. And then I went, again, being a journalist, into newspapers. Newspaper coverage, to me, is often incredibly instructive. So I found cuttings of the time. I then went and I absolutely pillaged the British Library for everything that they had. They have, the wonderful thing about the British is that they kept many things secret at the time, but they were also meticulous in their filing and very helpfully filed things under politics and secrets, top secret and confidential. So, there was a lot of that from the starting point. And then that in turn, and it's a very long answer to your question, and I'm sorry about that, led to me doing the journalism, which is going to the places, going to Sunam, going to Lahore, going to the parts of England where he'd been seen, meeting people who either had forebears, because remember, this is not so long ago. This is a man who people still remembered. One of the peers of the realm in this country, a man called Lord Inderjit Singh, played as a child on Udham Singh's lap and had vivid memories. So then you start, the bones are there. The bones are the pictures.
Yeah.
Then I put the muscles on, then the sinew, and that builds the body of the story.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and I love the way you bring out each character in this book. It's sort of unflinching, dramatic, a lot of color, and at the same time, very human, very gray, no black and white. And General Dwyer, in my head also I've collapsed the two, but The one who I really particularly like, the one who from his childhood you show his hatred of nationalists, the way the sort of hard decisions he takes in his early years in India leading up to Jallianwala Bagh. And of course, Udham Singh himself, his backstory, his early years, his psychological orientation, which is very interesting. So I just, again, the next question I would like to ask is, was this a conscious decision you made? Not to hide the warts, so to say, to present all the ambiguities and complexities that, especially around the main characters.
Sure. I mean, you say not to hide the warts, and that's applicable to Udham Singh, who for many is on such a high pedestal that he's no longer human anymore. He's ascended to this sort of demigod type realm that people put icons. But also, Dyer and O'Dwyer are not cartoon characters. They are flesh and blood human beings with flesh and blood motivations. It isn't interesting to me. If I wanted to write 2 dimensions, I'd make a comic. But this is more than that to me. Because I was trying to understand too. So you sort of hint at this. So Michael O'Dwyer, who the Irishman, who grew up in a place. I needed to find out all about it, where he was born, who he was, who his parents were, and to do this deep dive on how could he have not just presided over this terrible period in the history of the British Raj, but almost reveled in it. Actually, it has famously said he never lost a night's sleep over what happened in Jallianwala Bagh. And so I went right back to his roots, right back to his parents and grandparents. And the weird thing was, Himanjali, as you quite rightly say, this was a man who should have been sympathetic to the Indian cause. Absolutely should have. He was an Irish Catholic. He grew up in an area of Ireland which detested British or English rule. Which had felt the sharp point of a bayonet on numerous occasions, and which had starved to the point of death. I mean, all of this must sound very familiar, particularly we're talking at the Kolkata meet, and the famines in Bengal are notorious now. But Ireland suffered similar. And he grew up with all of that as a Catholic in a place where Catholics detested Britain. But he was different. And why was he different? Because his father thought that these nationalists who were fighting back were creating chaos. He would refer to them as thugs and hotheads. So, we are not just reared on our mother's milk, we're reared on our father's prejudices as well. And John O'Dwyer, Sir Michael's father, couldn't stand the chaos. And it set him apart from everybody growing up around him because the O'Dwyers thought differently. And this man, Sir Michael O'Dwyer, and I had to keep calling him, instead of calling him O'Dwyer and Dyer, I mean, apart from the fact those names are, unhelpfully similar, I just needed to distance them from their iconography as well. So I had to think of him as Michael and Reginald Dyer as either Rex or Reginald. But with Michael, the man who was in charge, the man who really, you can say the buck stops with him, he was always frightened. He grew up with fear. He grew up being molded around this cold, dread fear that the nationalists would punish his father, that they would come for him. And he ends up being vindicated in that because, sure enough, the IRA shoot into his family home. They narrowly miss his father and his sister, but they cause so much stress to his father. He has this terrible stroke, and then the best man in Michael's life dies. So, if you understand that, you understand how and why he came to India with not just the antipathy towards these cries of, can we have a voice in our own affairs, but this actual visceral hatred for what these clever Indians stood for and what they were asking for. And to me, that's really instructive. I mean, Dyer also, Dyer is always just portrayed as this 2-dimensional, heartless creep who sort of strode into the garden and started firing himself and ordering people to fire. Yes, he did. Yeah, what he did was even more monstrous. He told his men to stand on this raised bank in Jallianwala Bagh on that day, and he told them to fire and fire and fire, but turn their weapons everywhere the crowd was running. So the bodies that were found in Jallianwala Bagh were found in almost pyramids, and this is, when you talk about pyramids of bodies, it's reminiscent of what happened in Belsen and Auschwitz, people desperately trying to get out and killed where they were trying to escape. Same happened in Jallianwala Bagh. People were trying to climb over each other to get over this raised perimeter wall that went around. And instead of having any kind of humanity, for want of a better word, that these people are running away, so many were shot in the back, he tells his gunmen to turn, wheel, and fire, and fire, and fire, and then leave without a word, and then declare a curfew so no one could get help to their loved ones or get their bodies out. So, I needed to understand, how could a man do this? And what I found, and everything is very referenced in the book, is number one, this was a man who said, if you would have asked him, that he loved India and he loved Indians. Unlike Michael O'Dwyer, who, Indians were kind of slightly an irritating fact of life if you had to live in India. But, Reginald Dyer would have said he loved Indians and India. He was a sensitive boy. There's a story that I include in the book about how he, when he was a child, it is a story that his family tell, he was going out shooting birds and he shot a monkey by mistake, and how he wept and wept and was inconsolable because he was deemed to be a sensitive child, a child with a stutter, a child who, when he was sent back to England, had a funny Indian accent and this stutter, and was picked on here when he came back to Britain and hated it here. He thought this was not his home. India was his home. And so you suddenly, from looking at these roots and the dimensions, you suddenly get a person, which is so much more interesting than the devil who walks into the garden and opens fire. And sometimes it's harder to bear, and sometimes you maybe get some understanding. Udham Singh too, was not beyond reproach. He was cruel to people who loved him. He used people. Everyone he had this enormous charisma, and again, this is in the book and it's all very annotated, so you can pursue these things. Sometimes people left records written, sometimes verbal, sometimes recorded, where he made you feel like you were the only person who mattered, that he truly loved you. There were 9-10 different houses in London alone which thought he only lived with them, but he didn't. He was sort of using each and every one of these places to get closer to his quarry, and sometimes he abandoned the people who loved him most. So I think that's just more interesting, don't you, Himanjali? You're a great writer, so these things are mesmerizing, and when they're true, they are even more mesmerizing, I think.
Yeah, that's all just very fascinating, Anita. Yeah, I have read the book, of course, so all of it is coming back to me, and it's very interesting. But anyway, for my next question, I'm fast forwarding a little to how Udham Singh has now been appropriated in different ways by different groups. Like he's been appropriated by the right wing as a nationalist. He's seen as a Dalit icon because he came from a lower caste. Yet what we see in the book is a man almost lacking a larger political orientation. What seems to drive Udham Singh is personal circumstances more than the political. So, since you've studied him so closely, how do you think Udham Singh would have liked to be remembered? And generally, what would you say to, all these different facets of his personality?
So certainly this man is multidimensional, and certainly the image is one that is easy to appropriate because he adopted so many personas himself. So just before I get to your point about what he would have liked to have been remembered, can I just, if you don't mind sharing the picture, but you may have to jump ahead. There's one of a postage stamp, if you can find it. There's one of Bhagat Singh on one side and one supposedly of Udham Singh. If you're able to do that, whoever's looking after the pictures. So if you go forward again. There we are. So this picture is of a postage stamp, one of Bhagat Singh, who you'll recognize, and the other is supposed to be Udham Singh. That is not his picture. It's widely circulated. It is not Udham Singh. It is taken from a group photograph, which I think I've included in the book, at Shepherd's Bush Gurdwara, and it's the man standing behind him. And it's to me, that sort of symbolizes this dotted line around this personality, which people have seized on and projected onto. The real man is, again, much more interesting. So if you go to the next picture after that unfortunate stamp error, could you go forward again, please? So this is the first known picture of Udham Singh. He's the man standing at the center, at the back of this picture. And please go on one more. So, this is a child who was brought up in an orphanage. Next picture, please. There's a close-up of his face. Lean, haggard, looks older than his years here. This is after he served a prison sentence for gun running in 1927. And he has been brutally tortured. But he comes back to his village of Sinam, and there's a lovely story. I mean, the photograph has been kindly lent to me by the family involved. And the man who was very good friends with Udham Singh kept a beautiful memoir of when he met his friend again after this time, after he'd got out of prison. And there's this lovely story about they're riding a camel. And they're riding a camel through the desert, and he's holding on to Udham Singh behind him. And Udham says, "Please let go, not so tight, because they've left a load of scars on my back." And he sort of lifts up his shirt, and his back is this crisscross of scars where he's been flogged in prison. But then you go to the other picture, because that was kind of nice too. This is also Udham Singh. So that you saw that lean, haggard face. Oh yes, and when that picture where they are all standing, that first picture, Udham was never meant to be in that picture. So the man who writes this story said actually it was a celebratory picture. The two men at the front, if you go back one, I'll just back two, I'll show you that picture again. It's very cute. It was meant to be a celebratory picture. And Udham just happened to be in the village, and he jumps in at the back. If you go back one, if you don't mind. No, back. You're going forward, I think, if you go backwards, if you're able to. Otherwise, I hope you can remember what it was.
Yeah, we can remember that. Yeah.
Okay, so Udham suddenly jumps in the back and says, "You know what? Take me as well, because I'm going to be somebody. One day, I'm going to be somebody, and this picture is going to mean something." And I think that, if you want the key to who Udham Singh is, it is this desire to be somebody. So, he's a Cambodge boy who's brought up in an orphanage who has absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. He wants to be something. He goes along this slipstream of belief that many people did in India during the First World War, that come and sign up and fight for your king, fight for the Raj, and you will be rewarded. But he has a dreadful career in the army. It's very short, and he gets sent back with nothing. And so where he is in back in Punjab, he gets caught up in the ideology of the Gaddars and the rage of the Gaddar movement. That they promised, they lied, and it's a simple thing, but I want to be someone. I want to be someone. And there's no way that anyone, even his countrymen, take him seriously. So they don't give him anything to do. He tries to very much to get involved in the anti-British movement. Nobody gives him any, as you say, no one gives him any lift, right? Mm-hmm. So then, for want of money, this is a man who has to feed himself. He then goes off to work on the lunatic line in Africa, where a lot of, the very dispossessed went to go and work pretty much as indentured servants to work on this railway line. And he meets anti-colonialists there, who then said, go, if you really want to be someone, if you really want to be of help. And by this time, his hatred of the British, if there's any ideology, has its hatred of the British, that they did this to him. So, he goes back on the slipstream to America. And that, if you go back to the picture that you were on, this is the next phase, the next picture. And each phase seems unrecognizable to me from the picture before it, right? None of them look like the stamp, because that wasn't him. But this, this is a picture of him learning to walk with a straight back, learning to talk with confidence, learning English. He has this chance of happiness in America. He gets a job, he has money in his pocket, but still it's not enough, because this is a man who wants to be somebody. And he has that residual hatred for the British all the time. So there are, things that I've included in the book of his time in America, where he consorts with people who are known to be anti-British agitators. And he keeps trying to come back to England to get the men who did this in Jallianwala Bagh. Because I forgot to mention, but that in that memoir of, where he was being hugged on the camel, and he says, not too tight, it really hurts. He also vows that no matter how long it takes, he's going to kill the men who did the crimes of Jallianwala Bagh and more besides. And if you go forward again, this is another image of him. Keep going. So this is him in England, more looking like the man who the newspapers would seize on as this evil devil who upturns everything in 1940 by killing Sir Michael O'Dwyer. And the next one, please. So these are all the same man. Keep going. Oh, this picture, I love this. I'll just tell you a quick story about this picture. So this is also Udham Singh, who's caught completely by accident here. And this is what I love. So the man with no faces and all faces, which sort of explains why it's so easy to imprint on him. This was a photographer. This is now an image that's owned by the Getty Picture Gallery. But they went to Shepherd's Bush Gurdwara, which was the first Gurdwara in England, and they were taking pictures of people making langar. And they got this image, and it's Udham Singh, who happens to be making roti that day. Next picture. And of course, we have this extraordinary image. Now, he's not in this picture, I should say, but this is a still. It is promoting a movie in which he was an extra, because for a few extra bob here in the UK, he took on roles in movies. This is Alexander Korda's Elephant Boy, which he acted in as an extra, playing an Indian in the jungle of India, but it's set up here in a cold studio in Britain. And then the last image, please, if you have it. I think there's one more image of him, perhaps. Oh no, that will come back to that. Anyway, just if you come back to me. So so this is a man who could be so many things to so many different people. His ideology, he was at great pains that his one thing was Indians should be free. India should be free of British rule. British rule was at the heart of everything that had gone wrong in his life and in all Indians' lives. So that was his motivation. And to get to his quarry, he makes this vow, this dreadful vow, although it is probably not the way it is depicted in the statue outside Jallianwala Bagh, with him holding the dustful of blood-soaked earth, the great apocryphal story. But he does make this promise that this is what he's going to do, and this is also going to make him someone. He wants to be someone. But to do that, he follows very much the adage of my enemy's enemy is my friend. So he throws his lot in with the Gathers, he throws his lot in with the Bolsheviks, he throws his lot in with the anti-colonialists. He even goes to Germany, which is just under the rule of a man you may have heard of, Adolf Hitler, to make connections there as well. My enemy's enemy is my friend. Whatever helps me destabilize this oppressive regime, I will do. So all the rest of it that's now been projected on him, he wouldn't recognize that. He wouldn't have known that world at all. What he knew was a world where Indians were slaves in their own country, and he needed to do something about it.
Yeah, again, very fascinating, and it's sort of it's really layered and just not the way one thinks of the independence movement and all those like black and white characters. But anyway, and Anita, circling back to what you said earlier, your grandfather was there at the Jallianwala Bagh on that day, and what transpired affected him for the rest of his life. So that is your personal history also, which in some ways led you to write this book.
Oh yeah. But, led me to write it, but also put me off writing it for years, Himanjali.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, I didn't want to write it. I didn't feel I was able to write it.
Okay. So I was going to just ask that, do you feel you would have written this book differently, or perhaps not even been drawn to the subject if you didn't have that bit of personal connect?
I don't know the answer to that, because I only know what has happened, but I'm sure it would have been, if I had done it at all, and you're right, maybe I wouldn't have done it. If I had done it at all, let me think about that now, actually. I don't think I would have written it. I don't think I would have written it, because why would I wouldn't have become obsessed with it like I have been all my life.
Yeah.
I, like everybody else, would have just accepted, the story that Edward Fox once went into a garden and shot lots of people, some of them personally, and then Udham Singh, killed him. I would have taken that. That would have been enough.
Yeah.
But the reason,
unless you saw the photograph, unless you saw a photo, some visual representation which caught your imagination.
Maybe not. But I don't know. I mean, perhaps that would have been enough. But I suppose the personal connection just made it. I mentioned the first book as an itch I couldn't stop scratching.
Yeah,
and that's this book too. For ages, I thought I was too close to it. So just very briefly, my grandfather, who I never knew, my father was his youngest child by far, and he really didn't speak about what happened that day very much at all. Just, from my Thayaji's later on in life, I got dribs and drabs, and then from other relatives, and you kind of knit them together. But he went blind very early in his life, my grandfather did. And if anyone tried to sympathize with him and say, you know, I'm really sorry, Lalaji, you know, this is terrible, your eyesight. And he would get really angry with them because he would say, you know, don't pity me. God gave me my life that day, so it's only right he takes something in return. And, you know, we Indians understand that kind of inbuilt fatalism that we have, that there's a reckoning and a page that we somehow have to do hisab in. And that was him. But also he was a very quiet man. He was sort of, you know, people who knew him very well, my father included, said he was, you know, connected but not connected to the world. And nowadays, you know, people write volumes on this kind of thing, survivor's guilt. You know, he you know, that was him. That was his life. That it was just dumb luck that he had told his friends, just wait here, I'm coming, I'm just going to the market, which is very, very close to the garden. I've just got to go and do this thing, and then I'll come right back, and don't eat all the stuff in the tiffin. I'm coming right back. And that was it. You know, otherwise he wouldn't have been there, and I wouldn't. And I look at my children, and they wouldn't have been here. So, you know, maybe that's the reason I have been obsessed. And you know, just kept circling it. So maybe you're right. If I hadn't have had that connection, maybe I wouldn't have.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So my next question is slightly removed from the book, but of course also connected. Justin Trudeau apologized formally for the Pomagato Maru incident of 1914. But when David Cameron visited the Jallianwala Bagh in 2013, there was a sense of disappointment in India at the sort of statement that he made. It seemed to fall short of an apology. And you mentioned this in the preface to the book. So my question is, do you feel that historical wrongs need to be addressed by subsequent governments? That in this case, David Cameron should have said more?
So, okay, to answer your question, I am going to answer it, but I'm just going to do it through a circuitous way. When I was doing the book tour, and you know, it's been really well received here, which is not a given, because it's uncomfortable for a British reader. It's really uncomfortable, and for Irish readers, it has been even more uncomfortable, because Michael O'Dwyer is one of them. Yeah, he's a boy from Tipperary. He's so one of them. So when I went to do talks in Ireland, I would always have people waiting for the book signings who were in tears. And, you know, they would often try and hug me and say, look, I just want to say I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And when I used to come to work at the BBC, I would have letters waiting for me saying, I'm really sorry, that bastard was one of our bastards. And I'm quoting directly. Yeah. And I was really puzzled. I was always so puzzled because I just thought, you don't need to say sorry to me. You didn't do anything. You know, and I would be comforting them. It was a ridiculous thing where a grown man would be sobbing on my shoulder and saying, that's okay, you didn't do it. It's all right. You didn't do anything. So on the apology thing, you know, it wouldn't make a difference to me, but it would make a difference to other people. And I totally, you know, appreciate that. I would be as confused. But there is something about accepting what happened. And, you know, the narrative that went on, I mean, if you show the picture, I think I've got a picture of Cameron going to the garden. And then I'll tell you what he actually wrote. And, you know, it was a bloodless nonsense thing that, you know, a repetition of something before. If you can bring up the picture, that might help, actually.
Yeah, I think that came up by mistake the last time, the last one.
So it's a picture of David Cameron leaving marigolds by the Jallianwala Bagh Remembrance Monument. And he wrote in the Book of Remembrance, you know, this is a monstrous thing that happens, which is a direct quote of Winston Churchill. It's the next picture. This is something else. It's the next one, if you look at it. And it's a quote of Churchill, who said the same thing at the time. There was a Hunter Commission inquiry, and subsequently there was a great deal of talk about what happened at the massacre. Now that bugs me. that half thing bugs me, because it suggests that it was just one event, just one thing that happened, one monstrous event. And if you are able to, and we'll just have a quick whiz through actually what, and this is in the book also, if you go forward again from there, it was not a thing in isolation. There was not this great throwing up of hands that happened after the massacre, that, oh my God, what have we done? What happened was there was a doubling down. So if you can show the pictures, it will help me speak to the pictures. But, you know, Reginald Dyer blocked off the alley where a woman had been attacked by the angry mob. Oh yeah, these are the front pages at the time when the assassination took place. If you keep going, you might see some other pictures here. Keep going. So he blocked it off, and what he decided was that this is the infamous crawling order, which not everybody knows about, but people who lived on this alleyway when Marcella Sherwood was attacked would have to go on their bellies like worms and lick the boots of the soldiers. That's old people, women were not allowed, weren't meant to lick the boots, but they also weren't allowed to walk through. And the belief was if they really need to get to their houses or people need to get to them, they can cross the roofs. They just can't go unless they do this crawl. Keep going. So there's no repentance here. Michael O'Dwyer decided to put up these gallows, public gallows around Punjab to show what could happen if you defy the Sarkar. This is to put fear. This is the kind of thing, we know what's going on right now in Afghanistan. This is not out of place, and this is the British Raj that did this. Keep going. This is not one monstrous act. Flogging triangles were set up around the city where young men, this is no due process, young men who were suspected of being part of the mob that attacked this woman were tied and flogged till they were unconscious, to act as a warning to others. And of those people, most were then released because there was no foundation to them even being picked up. Next one, please. This is not one monstrous act. And as for, the rage that swept across the north of India after the massacre, people took to the streets. What was the response? That we need to say something. We need to bring these people together. No, they sent a warplane piloted by a man called Carberry, who strafed the ground from above, hitting people who were just on the road. This is not one monstrous act. He even says, in the inquiry, that he followed people into their villages and shot through their roofs. He had no idea if there were sleeping babies under those roofs, or women, or children, or anybody who had nothing to do with the revolutionary movement or even any of the protests that took place. If you can come back to me. So, my objection, I don't so much, it doesn't make any difference to me, and it won't make any difference to my grandfather, right? If Boris Johnson says sorry, but be honest, tell us everything and own it and teach it in schools. I grew up in this country. I studied history in this country. I can tell you everything about a Tudor roof. I can tell you about a Roman hypercore system. We never learned anything of this, and this is within 100 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. I think we should conclude now because we are sort of running out of time. And let me see if there are any questions. There's one question which I can see. So, okay, this is have you watched Shujit Sarkar's film on Udham Singh with Vicky Kaushal? Now have I? So the next question was.
I haven't traveled. I mean, we've had sort of COVID, so I haven't been able to travel. Not on such a wide release here. If anyone has seen it, let me know if it's any good. I haven't seen it.
Yeah. Okay. The next question is: are there similar events from other colonies that compare to Jallianwala Bagh and its aftermath? Shelley Khanna.
Now, you would be better off speaking to people who know more about this than I do, but certainly there are some horrifying stories that I have read about the Mau Mau uprising, which happened in Kenya. And there are other stories of brutality. It is not my field. It is not something I am an expert in. But there are people who are experts, and from time to time I read things that sound familiar, disturbingly familiar.
Yeah. So I think that's all. I don't think we have any more questions. So thank you for having us, and that it was a lovely conversation, lovely visuals, and it was great talking to you, Anita, as always.
Very nice talking to you too.
Yeah.